once a month, our office assigns somebody to either bring in food or cook food for like kind of the Secretariat of Evangelization as just like a way of being closer, building team, all of those things. And I've been avoiding being the volunteer to help with the food because it's just really not a skill set that I've developed in any way, shape, or form, you know? Like I can cook a couple of things well, but I would have to like, I don't know. I could do it. I can follow instructions, but I just haven't done it. So Lauren asked me, she took pity on me, and she's just like this amazing cook and stuff, and said, hey, you can be my assistant. That way you don't have to like run it. And I was like, yes, please. So I was helping her. We made these flatbread things with frittatas and whatnot. And it was just like, so she like brought all the ingredients, told me what to do, she made it idiot proof is what Lauren did. So I was like just going through like dee, and then she was like, hey, could you just like, and she was just like fixing it the entire time over and over again. And I was like, man, there is just a lot more to like think about strategy wise for this food. I'm just like throwing this pesto on and then this cheese. She was like, oh yeah, more cheese. That's not enough. And I'm like, oh, okay. And whatnot. And then, but by the end of it, like I was the one who assembled the flatbreads, and I was like, guys, these flatbreads, like my own personal recipe, hand put together by Jace. But whenever we're all hanging out, we always laugh a whole lot. And we were talking about knowing your world geography and how bad Americans are at world geography.
Are you pretty good at it?
No, I'm pretty solid with Europe. And I can get some other random ones. I used to know all of them countries in their capitals because of like singing a song from school, but that has since been flushed away down the memory hole. But yeah, we were all pretty bad at it, but we were just talking about all sorts of different things within that. And we were also talking about the other day, like the different types of Hispanic music, because I was kind of ragging on them. I was talking about how bad I thought Mexican music was, the way that they portray it, and more specifically, they're talking about norteñas. I think I'm probably butchering it, but that's that Mexican music that's like kind of got that polka feel to it, and it's got like the little horn and and
I was going to ask if you could give an example.
Yeah,
so perfect.
That was and it's like it's very conservative. The norteñas overall, it's very but it's extremely popular. But it's just like if country was set back 100 years, like country music here, like it's kind of like the equivalent. But then you have that's what Mexico's like pride and joy is, or what a lot of Hispanics that have come from Mexico over here, what they really like to listen to. But I was talking to my DJ friend Jared, and he was showing me like some Colombian specific music or Puerto Rican music, and that stuff is a banger. Like that's good, that hits and whatnot. And so I was kind of like jabbing him a little bit. I was like, this is your guys's. And I like played what like the top song was for norteñas, and I played like this Puerto Rican guy, and was just like, I was like, there's no comparison, like what's going on? And it was funny. They almost didn't even like, they're like, yeah, it's just like what we like. And I was like, huh. Anyway, that's my take on music that I can't understand the words. But they also told me about some of these different artists that are like really like profane and vulgar in Spanish, but like the beats are also really good, and like the groove of it all, and the vocals are good. So I could like, but I discovered, I was like, I can listen to this. I have no idea the horrific things that the person might be saying right now, but I'm just like, yeah. So
how interesting. It is interesting that sometimes the most profane songs are so catchy in their tune and then where the beats are.
It ain't fair. It ain't fair, man. You know, where's our golden era of? Like, I don't even need it to be like praise and worship music. I just want some. And there's a few like Imagine Dragons had some really big ones that were really good, and One Republic, but
yeah, it'd be nice to have
really
like some solid music that wasn't profane, but hits.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But we're back to book club, as producer Avery likes to describe it. Another thing, did Father Jerome, his podcast went a little bit viral on TikTok.
Oh,
like
really?
his little deal, mostly for negative reasons.
Like one we had him on, or a podcast he's doing?
The one that we had him on.
Nice.
We took a clip of him discussing like what the priesthood was, and it slid into Protestant TikTok somehow,
No way.
and like over 40 like really negative comments. That's like Rome equals Satan or whatever thing. So
Oh wow, nice.
yeah, so some serious responses.
Have we moderated it? Have we like come in with good apologetic responses? Or
One guy, we had one solo defender. Yeah, so go. If you're not on TikTok, stay away. If you're already sucked in, follow ArchOKC and help defend Father Jerome.
wow.
He's getting cooked.
Man, we should in another banter session we should pull those up and read some of them. And talk about them.
It'd be pretty funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, reading mean from SNL, the mean tweets thing. Oh my gosh, do you ever watch those?
No.
So it would be like Aaron Rodgers, who's a Green Bay Packer, or used to be the Green Bay Packers quarterback. Now he's with the Jets, best quarterback ever. But he would read it and it would say like, Aaron Rodgers, you are the worst player of all time. Eat my feet, or whatever.
I mean,
really weird, like overly aggressive tweets at him.
We had that in college. We called them brag bags in a student organization I was a part of. So like at the end of the meeting, people throughout the meeting, they'd pass in like just a little note or whatever. At the end, we'd read the brag bags. And the president before me would throw out a lot of them. If they were really vulgar, I'd throw them out. But if they were about me, I'd read it every time just because people knew they wrote a bunch about him. And so knew he threw them out.
Yeah.
There were some good ones.
Yeah. So I enjoyed reading those.
Oh yeah, that'd be good.
Oh, that would be funny. Just have Father.
Yeah, when we have him back on, we'll have him read those. That'd be even better.
That would be funny. Good times. Well, we'll get right on that. But so sequel to From Christendom and Apostolic Mission, the religion of the day. We kind of left off discussing some tenets of the neo-Gnostic progressive view, and we're going to try and wrap up those tenets today as we continue moving forward. Salvation comes through human effort alone is the next tenet. So there's something about it that, I mean, there just can't be a God. Right? Mm-hmm. Like it's the existence of a God or the salvation coming from a God is antithetical to what the modern progressive religion is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would just. What's interesting is like there's still some partial truth here, right? Like we do have to do some things as Christians. Like our efforts there, we're cooperating, but the progressive religion ignores the whole other side of the coin. So like we might have a season where we've done everything we can and we have to surrender or wait on the Lord. Mm-hmm. That wouldn't be an option for the progressive believer. But I mean, I think how depressing that could be, like the downside to that, like, and what's interesting, like, I think in some sense, even the distortion of what hope is kind of changes. I don't know that the book said this, but you and I were even discussing this the other day, like, secular hope or progressive hope would be like hoping for something to change, hoping that something changes. And like the Christian hope is like a hope in the eternal. And like amidst this season of suffering or non-change, though we might desire it and God might even desire it, like we can actually have total hope in the present moment receive that hope from the Lord, because he's changing us, transforming us, bringing us into himself. And the progressive believer doesn't even get a chance at that.
Mm-hmm. And it's so easy. Like this is probably your and I is one of our easiest like paths into feeling like a Gnostic is the idea, like the thing that I highlighted was just that it's really easy to get impatient with God to fix something that we think we might be able to fix ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always that temptation, like the speed in which we would prefer things to happen for ourselves, the speed in which we'd like to see injustices be corrected, the speed in which our situations, our healing, we would want our healing to happen, all of those things. It can really lend itself to us like that I'll do it myself.
Mm-hmm.
Or that feeling of on your own, whereas like the speed is just not important ultimately. Like there's suffering and you have to be in there and you have to be experiencing that, and the Lord doesn't like love that, but he's bringing about a greater good. And if it's slower, it's because it needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's best to be slower, you know? So that was a fascinating thing within it. And it's interesting, like I wanted to read this quote. There are ripe seed beds for growth of varieties of Gnostic belief systems that emphasize self-redemption rather than salvation by Christ. And, you know, you were talking about the guy that you met on the plane.
Mm-hmm.
The self-help,
mm-hmm.
everything. You know, I can take care of it.
Yep. Yeah, that we could muster all that up ourselves. And to your point, like one of the biggest poverties when we find ourselves slide into this way of thinking is like humility and obedience are like some of the best things for us in the spiritual life.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, absence. So patience helps bring out both of those, like having to wait on something, or admitting that we can't affect the change we want to, like that humility. And if we are tasked with saving ourselves, well, then there's just this overwhelming amount of pride that's there, whether we acknowledge it or not. And that's going to affect so many other things in our life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So moving on to the next one. This one's I'm really excited to talk about this one.
Me too.
This one's more exciting than the last one. The application of a technique or gnosis to bring about salvation. What does that mean to you, James?
What's interesting, I think in antiquity from like Gnosticism, it might look different than it does.
What does antiquity mean?
From like, so like ancient Gnostics, antiquity would be like, from a long time ago.
History.
Yeah, in history. So like ancient Gnostics existed pre-Christianity, even like in the kind of Greek view of the cosmos. There would have been a proper understanding for most Greeks that we were subordinate to something greater than us in the cosmos, but there would have also been a large amount of Gnostics that, you know, believe we can apply this particular specialized knowledge to save ourselves. And that might have looked like magic or Wiccan or occult or something, or sorcery. While there is that here today, of course, I would think most of us who are, especially if we're entrapped in neo-Gnostic thought without accepting that we are, most of us probably are engaged in magic. But I think I was pondering this, like where I slide into it today. It's interesting if you looked at like every clickbait thing or like social media hook, there's like the key to losing belly fat, or like the 5 ways to improve your marriage. Like there's like everything begins with here's the recipe you need to employ for success in this area, or for salvation in this area. And like on the surface, like to a certain degree, like, yeah, that's true. There's best practices that help us with things. But it's almost saying like you have to do it this way, and we can almost worship the process of a particular specialty or way of doing things in order to achieve perfection.
Yeah, I think it like the thing that hearing like this secret knowledge, like Augustine talked about it a whole bunch when he was with the Manichaeans. So it makes me think about that. But from a modern day example, you know, like it really makes me think of it. It's not a great example. It makes me think of the Church of Christ scientists, Scientology people. Like, this isn't going to be a perfect description of the tenets of Scientology, but there's a piece of it where you have to pay money to get access to new information that apparently builds all the way up to like we were made by aliens or something like that. But you have to like you pay money to get access to this information that no one else can have, and only the select few can be trusted with, which is so that's very interesting. But there's also like, even in, I was ruminating on this with you when we were reading this a while back, like even in a lot of our apostolates, like this can trickle in for ourselves as Catholics, even in like our way of doing things. Mm-hmm. Like maybe something was really successful somewhere, you know, some particular, you know, style or process or steps or whatever it is. But every human heart is individual and different, and the Lord doesn't really work within our steps. But we can make it so much that, well, the only way you're going to be any good as an evangelist is if you do these 5 things.
Or if you do it this particular way.
Way. And for $19.99, we'll share it with you. Like it kind of happens. It happens across the board within that. So there is like a right and a wrong way to do things sometimes, and there are best practices. So there is like I think what the gnosis thing is like the secretiveness of it. There's like a superiority.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The elitist view of it. Like in some sense, to keep going off your example, like if I were to try and discern, like, am I falling into these thoughts within the way I practice the faith? If I feel like I am better than the next Catholic because I'm going about it this particular way, going about evangelizing or going about deepening my interior life with these particular ways or these particular devotions or something, if that's like setting me apart as being more apt to be saved, I'm probably slipping into the gnosis trap.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if you're set apart, like there just aren't silver bullets.
Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the tenets. Later.
Yeah, no, he just says that later on there, like that they really fall into a silver bullet mentality. If if everybody just knew and lived by this, we'd all be saved. Mm-hmm. Which we fundamentally reject, which comes into our next tenet, which is a dualistic view of history, which I think is interesting, like, because we don't see, like, this world is not where we are or where our final place is. This is not where our eggs are. It's not our basket. So as we're going through the point of history, like, there's a certain sense of detachment from what's going on, a healthy sense of detachment as Christians. Obviously, we want to make great places for our families, be able to spread the gospel, have religious liberty. All of those things are really important in fighting for the unborn, all of that. But there's a sense of like, we understand that the suffering is going to exist regardless of what we do, because that's just the nature of where we're in. But for the Gnostics, like for the progressive religion, it's rejected as, like, that's considered a really negative and defeatist attitude because they don't believe in anything afterwards. Whereas for us, we're like, well, this is the reality of sin and where we are, and we're going to be working towards a relationship with our Creator and spending eternal life with Him. So it's very interesting that there's a dichotomy between the two of us there. That the only reasonable goal for progressive believers is a world substantially freed from evil, and we know that that's not happening in this world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. In the reality of dualistic, like, in what way do you see a progressive believer being dualistic?
That the world is either in a state of that everything is better now, or like I think the word that the book uses, like we're in an age of oppression of the secret knowledge and different things, or we're in an age of freedom, and we're moving towards that. Yeah. So and it's one or the other.
And it'd have to be dualistic in some sense, because I'd have to, if there were prior revolutions that got rid of those oppressions or whatever, I can't, with that stance, I, in some sense, can't even acknowledge that they happened. Right?
Because it's true.
So
because then it would be an admitting that it failed anyway.
Yeah, that it either failed anyway or there was a prior success, and I'm just rejecting that now as outdated. Yeah, the book talked about like there's almost a denial of logic because like on their merits alone, like past events, certain realities or structures within the world, like they're not evaluated on their own merit. They're just like outdated or old or not applicable anymore. So sort of just brushed aside.
Yeah, and even the second century Manichaeans that we're talking about, like with that were battling Saint Augustine and everything, like they wanted, like they were as close to Christianity as Gnosticism has probably been at that stage. And the interesting thing is that they wanted to just abolish the Old Testament, almost treat it like it never happened. They wanted to have it that God annihilated it, that it is gone. Where the reality is like it's been fulfilled, it's been brought forth to the forefront by the New Testament and all of that stuff. So it's just it's just very dualistic, very black and white in a way, and it has to be that way. Otherwise, it falls apart and becomes intellectually dishonest.
Yeah. The past always has to be an inferior, which is like a self-defeating kind of statement. Like you can't, the progressive belief system can't continue. It just falls apart there. It can't continue to be achieving salvation if the past is always in need of reform.
Right. And like, it makes me think of, I don't know if you ever watched the TV show. I wouldn't recommend this TV show, but it's a guilty pleasure of mine from pre-conversion called How I Met Your Mother. And there's a character on the show named Barney who's just like this degenerate character, but he's really funny. But he would come up to Ted, who's like the hero of the story, who's trying to find his bride. And there's one particular episode where he says, "Ted, new is always better. See? Like, here's a new girl, better than the old one." Different things. And he's like, Ted's like, "This is a rule, Barney. This is what," and he's like, "Yeah, new is always better." And then they'd be like, "Okay." One of Barney's favorite things was scotch. So he was like, "What's your oldest scotch?" to the bartender. And the bartender's like, "Oh, it's like a 100-year-old Glen Macallan. It's amazing. It's the best thing ever." And they said, "Okay, what's your newest scotch?" And it was like grape scotch or something. and they were like, "To have some of that, new is always better," right, Barney? So it's just like
I like that. I like that a lot. It's interesting to think about this. I don't know if the book mentions it here, but definitely later. Like, in some sense, this explains why our current world is so polarized, and why certain parts of the world seem to be, or certain belief systems and thoughts seem to be more and more intense about a topic. Like, let's take abortion, for example, as one. Like, if the old was always oppressive, like, we're going to have to get more and more and more and more radical about our stance on a particular topic to get rid of the oppression. Like, even folks who were of the same, ideological makeup, generally, call it 100 years ago, or even 50 years ago, 30 years ago, that we're talking about abortion, like, the same things coming out of the same aligned party, the things coming out of the same aligned group's mouths are now way more radical than they were then. And I feel like we could go to other aspects of life, even like materialism to some degree. Like, certain things are just, they almost have to be more of a revolution than the prior one if we're gonna it
has to be. It has to be more radical. It's a constant building thing. Like it says here, technical advances like refrigeration and social development like sexual liberation can equally be expected to arise with all other good things from this dynamic forward movement through time. But there's just no. It's always forward. It's never we're there. It's always what was behind. We have to. It's progressive. So it's an interesting thought pattern within that. So the next thing, so we have a dualistic view either we're in an age of oppression or an age of freedom. And depending on what age you're in, it really depends upon if we're present or not. Otherwise, it automatically becomes oppression later on. But they also go to a place where there's like two different distinct types of people: the people in possession of said knowledge, and the people possession of the gnosis, that it creates a new person almost. There's a salvation that happens when they receive whatever this knowledge is.
Yeah, it's like the enlightened versus the unenlightened.
Right. And we become the unenlightened, those who are resisting whatever their agenda is. And this has happened over and over throughout history, become tainted, biased, bigoted, whatever it is, because it's a tenet of the religion. If they have to be that way. Mm-hmm. They can't just be like a good person, become a natural enemy, as it were. So that's why we see so often like the polarized nature of our country, with gnosis having infected both sides equally. Mm-hmm. Like that there's just like a radical demonizing of other human beings, and they're not demons.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting to your point. You said both sides. Like you could take what we label as right and left and see Gnosticism or progressivism in either, or this idea of two different types of humans, like an enlightened versus an unenlightened. And it's interesting how dangerous that can be. Yeah. But like, I think what's interesting about the book, like, yes, it uses the word progressive, which we might put in a political lens, but in reality, like if we're honest and if we're trying to be humble and we're trying to realize this, like if my viewpoint on things is different, that doesn't make me progressive or not progressive necessarily, in the sense that this book is using it. You know? But like if you took kind of a far right, super conservative group, you could, and we're honest about it, we can see where we're falling into the trap of Gnosticism, and in the same exact way, different issues, different conclusions, perhaps, as someone on the right. But it's like very dangerous. You have these like probably more pure group that might not be in either camp that is being kind of outed, like, okay, you haven't drank the Kool-Aid on this, so you're clearly unenlightened.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think of, like, my dad has called me woke before, and that's not even close to, like, I don't identify with that particular set of beliefs of my dad. My dad is a very, very conservative guy, very, very on the right side. And like, there's not room for thinking something else other than like this truth.
Well, it's interesting, like if we're orthodox in the sense of like moral orthodoxy, like taking what the church teaches us as true, we could on different topics totally become non-trusted and non-tolerated by either
the establishment,
by their polarized side, because of that. We're conflicting with the enlightened thing that they know to be solid truth versus the revealed truth that we know to believe, even though it's hard sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's a fascinating thing. It's almost like two groups of humans, but technically like a lesser group and a higher group.
It's a fascinating thing, and you can just, another example, like, so that would be another example. This is kind of a nerdy example. Every now and then I play this game on my PlayStation called Skull and Bones. It's a pirate game. It's like a big, massive open world, but you can play with like other people. And I don't remember how I got invited, but I got invited into this like group. And they have a chat on Discord together and all that stuff. So I was like, it's 10 o'clock. Everyone's asleep. I'll talk to these guys, see what's going on. And they have this guy leader. His name's Fode, and he's like, he lives in North Carolina, like out in the country. And the dude's just like, it really, really reminds me of oil field. Like, is like the vibe that he gives. So it's like F-bombs every other word, different things. But the dude's like unabashedly like stomps out, like says, well, I am woke, I ain't doing that stuff, and just and but there's just like, it's just an example of the parallelization. But he's also, at the same time, he's also saying, yeah, but like, at the same time, like, don't touch my weed, and things like that.
That, yeah.
Right. So there's just this, like, I'm in I like this ultra. What is the word for ultra conceited, ultra pride, that can just seep in. And when you're basing everything, when you are making yourself your own God, that's what essentially this all is.
Yeah. I love the quote the book has that, we might, that good and evil in the Christian understanding can't be mapped into discrete, different groups of people or times, but that good and evil the divide runs through every human heart. And the progressive religion is going to tempt us to think that we're on the right side of this and other people are fully evil. But in reality, like, no, we all have evil we need to root out, and we all have good. And in some sense, we all have blended, mixed motivations and thoughts.
Yeah. So the second to last point that we're going to be covering, which is also super cool, is that revolution is the process by which salvation is achieved. If there is not something to rebel against, if there's not something that they perceive as oppression, the establishment, the structures, what may be, whether it's a government, whether it's another religion in the area, all of those things, they have to be rebelling against something. Like, it's the only way to cleanse this stuff. And so we've seen, we've talked about all the different movements go over time. The Gnostic movements with the Nazis, with the French Revolution, with the woke movement and everything else. Like, if there's not something to fight, and the annihilation of that said thing is the goal, and nothing is done until it's annihilated, which is a scary thing. And it's also kind of like where a lot of times our persecution can come from. It's like it's like a natural life cycle of the church, which is scary.
Yeah, and a full-on revolution never really leaves things afterwards better. They're like decimated. Because we're talking about overthrowing or ruining a structure of something. And like, sure, if everyone in that structure is completely evil, which we know not to be true as Christians, we know that it's more mixed. It's interesting. It's almost like the opposite of what the Lord says about like the weeds in the field. Like he says, like, not to pull them up because you might pull up some of the good harvest with it. And like a revolution would like burn it down. Like, burn down the good stuff. We got to get rid of.
Burn it all. It's all bad.
We got to inoculate all the bad.
Yeah, it's dualistic.
Yeah,
dualistic, like a transformation that will necessarily and spontaneously take place once the world order, or the one evil order, has been destroyed.
It's interesting. My wife and I read this book called The Lemon Tree. It's written by a Jewish woman about about growing up in the area of Israel/Palestine that like was over time like continually taken over by the opposing group. And she has a statement in there that I think sums up like the position of the book. But she says if we're to achieve peace, like true peace demands everyone to accept less than what they deserve. And I thought that was a beautiful quote. But one thing I saw in that, reading that book, but then in light of like viewing the Hamas-Israel reality, is that if you like just take an objective view and pull off our scales of how we've been biased, like you can see that quite honestly both sides have been wronged and that there's objective evil present, and then you can see that there's like innocent loss happening mixed up within the like loss, the needed loss for war. And so it's like and I don't know if I'm right, but just looking at it, and reading this book, like part of me is like, man, the progressive view has taken over both sides of that conflict for a while, where we're just removing the wheat and the weeds in an effort to win. And there's just utter chaos, you know? And the only perfect thing would be like if God could intervene and stop it and just institute total peace. So it's very messy, right? So like, I don't know, for clarity, I have no idea how to solve that, but we can see like how just the view of, hey, we've got to overthrow this, that both sides have adopted in a conflict like that.
Yeah.
What it's going to leave is just a decimation for everyone.
Yeah. And it all starts ideological, right? Ideological revolution for the most part. It doesn't necessarily have to result in like full blown violence, but it very often will. Eventually, like as an example, like the sexual revolution was an inherently violent thing if you discount like the abortion spinning off of that, then it's like a genocide. But as it all progressively moves forward, like it just turns to systematic violence by the demands of its own inner logic, like with the French Revolution, the Soviet Gulag, Chinese Cultural Revolution, the Nazi death camps. Those are all examples of like where you start somewhere and it's like it's not fast. I don't think either of us are saying, or I don't think this book is saying that like here in 20 years, the United States is going to round people up and kill them, you know. But that's where it naturally
could be a possibility.
That's where it naturally leads towards.
It's interesting. The book talked about like in two different spots the reality of like gradual reform, and so that in the first spot he talks about that being more of like a Christian thought, you know, realigning personal and social life as kind of a perennial thing, like we're in a constant state of reform and growth towards the Lord. Which is interesting because you could see like even in the earliest parts of Christianity, like you can see Christianity kind of baptizing things, if you will, like things that were like formerly pagan, like kind of taking over feast days, like so somewhat embracing like the things of the culture that were good, but Christianizing them, and sort of like gradually shifting them this way. But then it also talks about that like amidst progressive believers, there are some kind of gradualist movements to where they realize that some people they're aligned with are kind of polarized and this is going a little too far. And there develops two things. One, some of the progressive movement around that ideological issue is sort of pushing that person into the unenlightened category. But then also that person themselves becomes like develops a sense of inferiority within that belief system. Because they're not as like pure or true to the cause. And what's interesting, like if the particular issue was a legitimate evil and trying to be addressed, like the gradualists would have a better long game win, you know? And so it's just kind of interesting that they get tossed to the side. Yeah,
I wholly agree. Yeah, they become inferior. Still mostly is. So the last stage is like the necessary failure of modern religion. The progressive revolution always ultimately fails because progressive belief is founded on a radical departure from reality. Paradoxically, the more completely a given revolution succeeds, the more complete will be its resulting failure. Which is we saw that, especially with like the Nazis, right? It was a very complete takeover, but the resulting failure of what they had, not just because they lost a world war, but like the erosion of the country and everything were demoralized and like just flattened by its failure from it all. Any thoughts within that?
This section was written above my pay grade, but very well written in how how modern religion functionally has to fail in order for the system to work. It kind of breaks out three main responses against three main responses that sort of come among different people, and maybe that's what we
we
what
can
we
talk
drill
about
into.
those.
Yeah,
Like the first response being simple disillusionment, like that the revolution fails because everyone's bored of it. Everyone's doesn't really care about talking about it anymore. Like we've been saying it over and over again, so it just falls flat on its face. When they're faced with a failed revolution, the second one being faced with a failed revolution, the specific form of that particular salvation gets discredited, and we await what the next one is going to be. It's like we like silently we're like, oh,
that revolution didn't work. We need to pick a better one.
Yeah, which I think we'll see. I think we'll see multiple iterations of that before it gets to the...
Yeah, I like the examples he cited there, like Eastern German fascists becoming like really great communists, or youthful Woodstock revolutionaries
some of the most...
turning into like Silicon Valley magnets to like make the world better technologically, or Polish communists.
Or even like pastors, like, there's like people who were at Woodstock, they were like, or who were a part of that whole revolution, who were like, I guess that's more the third point. Sorry, keep going.
Oh, I was saying the other example, he mentioned like Polish communists quickly embracing like a capitalism, or privileged white feminists joining against privileged whites. It's kind of it's like, okay, that cause wasn't working, so I'm transforming into a new one.
Yeah, the one that I think is going to be really interesting, or the one that I find the most interesting playing out, is like the radical feminist versus the transgender movement.
That will be interesting to see
how that one ultimately plays out.
Yeah, because you're right. In some sense, like a radical feminist like could now make transgender the evil that she wants to attack, or needs to leave behind the feminist ideology in a large part and adopt this transgender one as the new iniquity.
So this is the most common one amongst Gnostic, is like, well, that didn't work, let's move to the next one. The one that we want the most Christian response when revolution fails. Like, these are the three options. First, disillusionment. Second, they pick something else. And three, there's like actually a serious re-understanding and reconfiguring of what do I believe. And honestly, like, going through that, and if the reevaluation results in an understanding of their pride and different things, like, they'll end up coming home a lot of the time, and we have to be there to catch those balls as they get kicked. As people get kicked out of the progressive movement, we got to catch them and say, hey, you're loved and you have a community here.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wrote down in the margin, like, how can we cooperate with a revival that follows a revolution?
Yeah.
Like, how can we turn revolution into revival,
or at least pay attention to that?
Yeah, or watch how we're communicating too, right? Like, can we communicate in such a way mindful that, okay, there's three movements that people are going to have here when the revolution doesn't work, because it can't work because there always has to be another one. But one, like, okay, they're going to move into cynicism, despair, or nihilism. Okay, so there's truth we could speak there. Two, this is a little harder, their second response, where they're just jumping from revolution to revolution. But three, where there's the chance to just, like, honestly recognize their own pride. I think if we're communicating in a way that is just as neo-Gnostic, just as progressive, so let's take the trans movement. If I'm, like, attacking the people and acting utterly ridiculous towards folks, or, like, take COVID, if I'm shouting on one side things that are totally untrue because I just am so turned off by how the other side did it,
alienating.
I'm really not bringing about anything positive for the opportunity for number three to work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But if we respond as Christians, like, with love, with humility, with, in a way that helps receive people, we know that this third response is possible, even if it's subsurface at the moment, right? Like, because we know the realities that they're in. I don't know. I just think that leaves hanging this chapter like a question for the Christian.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. How
do we
going to
behave
respond?
amidst the revolutions of our time? How do we receive and respond to people?
Yeah. And what are the strategies to be pastoral in meeting some of these people coming through? And I'm sure that's something that we'll just, I think as we continue through the book, it's going to give us some of those particular ideas. But man, that's just such a good point that you're making of, wow, these people are coming down from something that had them in its clutches, and we could jeer, we could be happy that they failed, like say like for the abortion movement, like how did we react for Roe v. Wade or something, which could have been seen as a big failure of a particular Gnostic movement? Were we just like rubbing it in, were we a little stoked about it, or were we like, all right, let's receive and understand the person, and it gets very much down on the relational level. So I love that it points that out as like a possible reality that we can't discount.
There's a piece of me that like I don't read this as wanting to water down the faith or like pretend to be something we're not. That's not where I'm going here, but there's like an art of connecting with people, right? And so like if we go to the chapter and notice like, okay, based on the progressive piece, if we go to that section about the two kinds of people a couple tenets ago, like there's probably a way that we can choose to refrain from being counterpolarizing about something without moving into a place of lying or denying truth, right? So like we can actually agree with the suffering that a young pregnant single woman is going through, right? Like we can actually choose to talk about some of the things that they see as evil there, right? And spend time with that. And if we're not, it takes two parties to fight. So if we're choosing not to fight, and we're talking about some of those things, and I'm mainly not talking about like on the political sphere here, because that'd be pretty hard actually. I'm talking about like your friend who lives down the street that you share life with, and like maybe you're a common family, common neighborhood, maybe even common church. Like you can be their friend even though they share opposing ideas or have opposing ideas. But I think there's a way of aligning on the good, aligning on the things that we both agree are evil, and them knowing how much we love them, and us saying the truth. You really only need to say it once for them to know what. But then you can talk about the common things you're working on, and maybe you could even find a way to work on it together. Yeah. Like crisis pregnancy centers, that's probably tough for many that are fully caught in, but there's probably other examples of, sure. Like the Christian response, like to war, for example, like we want peace, generally speaking, but there's probably a way over the tenure of a relationship to not get caught in the need to fight back with the same horsepower, the same firepower. Yeah. So that then when it fails, because it will fail, the revolution will fail, we still have the relationship, like equity, to receive them, to talk through things. Definitely. But yeah, I don't know. I think this answer is probably nuanced and different for every human relationship.
Every single one. And God created it and we can land the plane with this. God created each of us with another person in mind that we can bring him to. Mm-hmm. Like there are people that have been put on this earth that I was specifically created to help reach. Yeah. And that's how it is for everybody.
It's really a wonderful way to view the Great Commission, is like, going to all the corners of the world to evangelize. Like there's a particular corner that Jace Palmer's been planted in. Mm-hmm. And like people who might only know of the Lord's love and his mercy through Jace's words and his deeds, and same for every listener here. There's a set of people that probably will only hear the gospel, will probably only experience the love of Christ through you.
Definitely. All right. Well, this has been Red Dirt Catholics. I'm Jace.
And I'm James.
We'll see you next time.